The city wept, as it always did. A persistent, monotonous drizzle had been falling for what felt like weeks, blurring the edges of the gray buildings outside my window into an impressionistic smear. My apartment, with its stark, minimalist lines and polished concrete floors, usually felt like a sanctuary from the perpetual damp. Today, it felt like a cage, amplifying the silence that had grown between Liam and me, a silence far more oppressive than the drumming of rain against the glass. I traced the frame of an old photograph with a fingertip, the cool metal a small anchor in the rising tide of my unease. It was a picture of us, taken years ago, back when our laughter was effortless and our smiles reached our eyes. Liam's arm was around my waist, pulling me close, his head tilted towards mine, a conspiratorial glint in his gaze. I remembered the exact moment, a crisp autumn day, sun-drenched and vibrant, a stark contrast to the eternal twilight that seemed to have settled over our lives now. We had been so young, so certain, so utterly intertwined. I remembered believing with every fiber of my being that our love was an unbreakable thing, a force against which no storm could prevail. Now, looking at that snapshot of perfect happiness, it felt like a relic from a forgotten civilization, a testament to a time that might as well have been a dream. The distance between us hadn't manifested as shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. It was quieter, more insidious. A subtle shift in the way he held my hand, or didn't. The increasing frequency of his late nights, explained away with vague references to critical deadlines or client emergencies. The way his eyes, once so quick to find mine across a crowded room, now seemed to skate past me, landing instead on some invisible point beyond my shoulder. I had tried for months to rationalize it away. Work stress, the demands of modern life, the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But the gnawing anxiety in my gut had become a constant companion, a low hum beneath the surface of my carefully constructed composure. Today, that hum had escalated into a shrill, insistent buzz. I was tidying the apartment, a futile attempt to impose order on the growing chaos within my own mind. Liam's coat, a heavy wool overcoat he wore almost daily in this climate, lay discarded over an armchair. I picked it up, intending to hang it properly, and as I did, my fingers brushed against something stiff in an inner pocket, a small, crumpled ticket stub. My heart gave a strange, lurching thump. I pulled it out, smoothing the creased paper with trembling fingers. It was for a cinema, a late-night showing of a B-grade horror film. My brow furrowed. Liam detested horror films. He found them crude, predictable, a waste of perfectly good screen time. More than that, the date printed on the stub was from last Tuesday, a night he had explicitly told me he was working late, a crucial presentation demanding his full attention until well past midnight. I remembered waiting up for him, the apartment feeling vast and empty, finally drifting off to sleep with the faint hope of hearing his key in the lock. He hadn't come home until nearly 3. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming a frantic rhythm against the window pane. The ticket stub felt suddenly heavy in my hand, no longer a harmless scrap of paper, but a small, jagged shard of ice. It wasn't proof, not really. He could have gone with a colleague, perhaps, a team-building exercise, a forced outing he hadn't wanted to mention to avoid my teasing. My mind, ever the loyal advocate, scrambled for explanations, for any plausible scenario that didn't involve the one word that had begun to echo in the hollow chambers of my chest. But the explanations felt thin, brittle. They cracked under the weight of his general evasiveness, the way his gaze now seemed to avoid mine, the growing chasm between us. This ticket for a film he despised on a night he claimed to be working late was a thread, a single, insignificant thread perhaps, but one that felt like it was beginning to unravel the entire tightly woven fabric of my reality. I stared at the numbers, the date, the title of the movie, imprinted on the cheap paper, each character a tiny pinprick of doubt. slowly, inexorably, puncturing the fragile balloon of my carefully maintained peace. The silence in the apartment was no longer just about Liam's absence. It was about the deafening roar of my own thoughts. The small, crumpled ticket stub lay on the polished concrete counter, a silent accusation. My loyal advocate of a mind, usually so adept at constructing comforting fictions, had finally fallen silent. There was no plausible explanation for Liam, who loathed jump scares and cheap gore, to be at a late-night horror film, least of all on a night he'd supposedly been chained to his desk. The rationalizations felt like tissue paper against a gale force wind, tearing away until only the cold, hard truth remained, stark and undeniable. This wasn't just a miscommunication, or work stress, or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. This was something else, something hidden. The hum in my gut had become a scream in my ears. I paced the sterile apartment, each step echoing the frantic beat of my heart. The rain outside continued its relentless assault, a fitting soundtrack to the storm raging within me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the ticket was just the first thread. And I knew, with an equally terrifying clarity, that I had to follow it. Liam's laptop sat on his desk in the home office, a sleek silver rectangle of forbidden knowledge. My stomach churned. I had never, not once in our 10 years together, intentionally invaded his privacy. Our relationship, built on a foundation of mutual trust and respect, had never demanded such a transgression. But now, that foundation felt like shifting sand, and the need for answers, for any kind of certainty, was a primal, overwhelming force. It felt like I was drowning, and the laptop was a lifeboat, albeit one crafted from betrayal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. The screen glowed to life with his familiar desktop background, a serene landscape photo we'd taken years ago on a trip to the Scottish Highlands. A bitter irony. I knew his password, a simple combination of our anniversary date and the first 3 letters of my name. He had said it years ago, a small, sweet gesture. Now, it felt like a mocking whisper. Logging in felt like stepping across an invisible line, severing a part of myself I could never reclaim. The screen flickered, revealing the array of icons. I started with the obvious, searching through his email, his messaging apps, his browsing history. Nothing. No illicit love letters, no suspicious chats, no hushed conversations with an unknown name. He was careful, meticulously so. Or perhaps I was just looking in the wrong places. The absence of explicit evidence was, in its own way, almost more unsettling. It suggested a level of premeditation, a deliberate erasure of tracks that felt utterly alien to the Liam I thought I knew. Then, buried deep within a folder optimistically labeled Work Documents Q3, I found it. Another subfolder, simply titled Images. My heart gave a painful lurch. I clicked, and a grid of thumbnails appeared. They were photos from his recent business trip to Lisbon, a trip he had described as tedious, filled with endless meetings and solitary dinners. But these images told a different story. Vibrant shots of historic streets, sun-drenched plazas, ancient castles framed against a brilliant blue sky. Tourist photos, essentially. But something was wrong, profoundly, chillingly wrong. Every single photo, without exception, was devoid of people. Not just a lack of specific individuals, but a deliberate, almost surgical absence of any human presence. A bustling square, but with every passerby cropped out, leaving oddly empty spaces where crowds should have been. A cafe terrace, but with the tables and chairs vacant, as if the world had momentarily held its breath and vanished. The precision of the cropping was unnerving, a meticulous act of erasure that spoke volumes. He hadn't just taken photos of architecture, he had removed the life from them, leaving behind a series of beautiful, haunting blanks. It was as if he was trying to prove he'd been alone, or, more terrifyingly, hiding the fact that he hadn't been. The facelessness of it all made my stomach clench. Who was he with that he needed to erase their presence so completely? My fingers, now numb, moved almost instinctively. I knew Liam used a location tracking app on his phone, synced to his laptop, ostensibly for security in case it was lost. I clicked on the map icon, my breath catching in my throat. A timeline of his movements appeared, a digital breadcrumb trail of his past weeks. I scrolled back, past the office, past our apartment, past the gym. And then I saw it, a cluster of repeated visits, not to a hotel or a client's office, but to a residential address. In a part of town I didn't recognize, an affluent, tree-lined suburb on the other side of the river, far from his usual haunts. The visits were frequent, sometimes lasting hours, almost always coinciding with his late nights at the office. The pieces began to click into place with a sickening finality. The ticket stub, the cropped photos, meticulously scrubbed clean of any human trace. And now, the repeated visits to an unfamiliar residential address. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a burgeoning certainty, a cold, hard knot forming in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse. This was a secret life, carefully constructed, meticulously maintained, existing just beneath the surface of our shared reality. The quiet deception wasn't just a possibility. It was a terrifying, undeniable truth, revealed by digital ghosts and the chilling absence of faces. I closed the laptop with a soft click, the screen going black, reflecting my own hollowed-out expression in its dark depths. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening roar of a world collapsing. The laptop's dark screen mirrored my vacant stare, a distorted reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My world hadn't just collapsed, it had vaporized, leaving behind a chilling vacuum where love and trust once resided. The rain outside, a constant, mournful drone, now seemed to mock my internal desolation. I pushed the laptop away as if its cold metal might somehow contaminate me further, and stumbled back to the living room. The minimalist apartment, once a testament to our shared aesthetic, now felt like a cage of polished concrete and muted tones, each surface reflecting an unbearable emptiness. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost its meaning, dissolving into the gray haze of my shock. I sat on the sofa, knees drawn to my chest, staring at nothing, feeling everything. The digital ghosts, the meticulously cropped photos, the map with its damning cluster of pins, replayed in my mind's eye, an endless, silent film of betrayal. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise now felt tainted, retroactively falsified. Had it all been a performance? How long had I been living a lie, oblivious, while the man I loved constructed an entirely separate reality? The sound of the key turning in the lock jolted me. Liam, my breath hitched. He was home. The sudden surge of adrenaline was almost physical, a cold wave washing over me. I hadn't moved from the sofa, hadn't even processed what I would say, what I would do. All I knew was that the man walking through the door was no longer the man I thought I married. He was a stranger, wrapped in familiar skin. "Elara, you're home early." Liam's voice, warm and familiar, cut through the silence. He stepped into the living room, shedding his damp coat, his eyes scanning the room, then settling on me. A faint frown touched his brow. "Everything all right? You look a bit pale." He crossed the room, dropping his briefcase by the door, and knelt before me, taking my hands in his. His touch, once a source of comfort, now felt like a live wire, sparking a chaotic mix of revulsion and a perverse longing for the comforting illusion. I pulled my hands away gently, feigning a sudden chill. "Just a long day," I mumbled, my voice rougher than I intended. I forced a weak smile, desperate to conceal the maelstrom within. The thought of confronting him, of shattering the fragile peace, felt unbearable. Not yet. I needed more time to breathe, to process, to steel myself. He didn't push it, merely observing me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I picked these up on the way," he said, standing and producing a bouquet of white lilies from behind his back, their pristine petals a stark contrast to the gloom outside. "Thought they'd brighten things up a bit. You've been so quiet lately, love." "I know I have too. Work's been absolutely brutal." He placed the lilies in a vase, then sat beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders, drawing me into his warmth. The scent of rain and his familiar cologne enveloped me. My body stiffened, then, against my will, softened slightly. This was the Liam I knew, the Liam who brought me flowers, who worried about me, who blamed his distance on work, the Liam I wanted to believe in. "I know I've been distant," he continued, his voice a low, soothing murmur against my hair. "It's been non-stop, Elara. Project deadlines, client demands. I've been barely sleeping, honestly. My head's just been stuck in spreadsheets and reports." He sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. "But it's settling down now. I've actually cleared my schedule for next weekend. We could finally take that trip to the coast we talked about. Just the two of us. Get away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the apartment, the city, the rain. "Reconnect." His words, so earnest, so perfectly calibrated, were a cruel balm to my raw wounds. A part of me, the part that still clung to the shards of our past, yearned to believe him. The longing for comfort, for the familiar normalcy, was intoxicating. He was so convincing, so much the man I had loved for so long. The man who had made me feel safe, cherished, seen. The man who was now, perhaps, an elaborate fiction. My mind wrestled with itself. The cold, hard facts of the ticket stub, the cropped photos, the location history, they screamed betrayal. But Liam's physical presence, his familiar scent, the warmth of his arm around me, his gentle voice, the lilies, the talk of future plans, they whispered of love, of reconciliation, of a simple misunderstanding. Was it possible? Had I overreacted? Was my anxiety, my latent insecurity finally manifesting as paranoid delusion? The relief, the desperate, overwhelming relief that flooded me at the thought of being wrong was almost unbearable. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to erase the last few hours, to unsee what I had seen. I leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into my chilled bones. "I'd like that," I whispered, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth, yet carrying a fragile thread of hope. It was a hope I knew, even as I embraced it, was likely false. But in that moment, in the comfort of his embrace, under the spell of his convincing performance, I allowed myself the luxury of believing. I allowed myself to be swept away by the current of an old, familiar love, desperately hoping it would carry me back to shore, back to the safe, untroubled waters of our life together. We spent the evening talking, really talking, for the first time in weeks. He listened, he laughed, he held me close. Later, in bed, his touch was tender, reassuring, a silent promise of renewed intimacy. And as I lay beside him, listening to the relentless rain, I tried to convince myself that the storm inside me had passed, that my fears had been nothing more than the cruelest kind of paranoia. The truth, however, lay dormant, a ticking time bomb beneath the fragile facade of our manufactured peace. The next few days were a strange, unsettling tableau of domesticity. Liam, true to his word, was more present, more attentive. He'd bring home takeout, suggest evening walks under the perpetually bruised sky, and even made coffee for me in the mornings, something he hadn't done in months. Each gesture, each kind word, was a feather-light brush against the raw wound of my suspicion. I found myself clinging to these moments, desperately trying to reassemble the shattered fragments of my trust, to convince myself that the digital ghosts had been a trick of the light, a figment of my own unraveling mind. I watched him, subtly, constantly. I searched his face for tells, for a flicker of guilt in his eyes, a hesitation in his smile. But he was seamless. His affection felt genuine, his weariness palpable. He spoke of the coastal trip with enthusiasm, even pulling up photos of quaint seaside cottages. And with each passing hour, the crushing weight of the evidence I'd uncovered began to feel less like irrefutable proof and more like a fever dream. Maybe, I reasoned, he'd just had a rough patch, a period of intense stress that had made him withdrawn. Maybe the cropped photos were just an aesthetic choice. Maybe the location pins were a glitch. The human mind, I discovered, is remarkably adept at constructing elaborate fictions to protect itself from unbearable truths. The rain continued its mournful symphony, a constant reminder of the gray world outside and the shifting landscape within me. I was a tightrope walker, suspended between a comforting lie and a devastating truth, each step precarious, each breath held. Then the phone rang. It was Chloe, a mutual friend from our university days. Her voice, bright and effervescent, was a stark contrast to the muted tones of my apartment. "Elara, hi, how are you? It feels like ages." Her cheerful energy was almost jarring. "Chloe, I'm good, just the usual," I managed, forcing a lightness into my tone. We chatted about her new job, about mutual acquaintances, about the incessant rain. It was a normal, mundane conversation, the kind that used to offer a pleasant distraction. But today, every word felt like background noise, my internal radar still scanning for any disturbance. "Oh, speaking of Liam," Chloe chirped a few minutes into the call. "I almost ran into him the other day. You know, last Tuesday when I was grabbing coffee near the old market, I was just crossing the street and there he was." My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Last Tuesday, the day he'd claimed to be working late, the day of the film ticket stub. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh, really? I didn't realize he was in that part of town." "Yeah, me neither," she laughed. "He looked so happy, Elara, really beaming. And you know, I almost called out to him, but then I saw he was with his sister, and they seemed to be having such a lovely chat. I didn't want to interrupt their family time. She's really pretty, by the way. Dark hair, lovely smile. I thought, oh, it must be nice for Liam to catch up with family. It's so rare, isn't it, to see him with anyone from his side of the family?" The line went silent. The rain outside seemed to amplify, drumming against the window pane with sudden, fierce intensity. Chloe's cheerful voice, so full of innocent observation, faded into an echoing void. "Liam is an only child." The words, a fundamental truth I'd known for over a decade, screamed in my head. He had no sister. He had never had a sister. My blood ran cold, then hot, then ice cold again. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a lead weight dragging me down. The world tilted on its axis. The tightrope snapped. "Elara, you still there?" Chloe's voice, now tinged with a hint of concern, pierced through the ringing in my ears. "Yes," I rasped, the sound a dry, brittle whisper. "Yes, Chloe, I'm still here." My mind was racing, not in a panic, but with a terrifying clarity. The ticket stub, the cropped photos, the location pins, Liam's convincing performance, all the disparate threads, the subtle anxieties, the desperate hopes, they've all coalesced into one undeniable, monstrous truth. There was no sister. There never had been. "Everything all right, love? You sound a bit off." "No," I said, my voice gaining a strange, flat quality. "No, Chloe, everything is not all right. Thank you for calling." I didn't wait for her reply. I just pressed the end call button, the click a stark, definitive punctuation mark on the end of my delusion. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering softly onto the carpet. I didn't pick it up. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the rain-streaked window, watching the world outside continue its indifferent spin. The desperate hope I had clung to, the fragile belief in a misunderstanding, had been brutally, irrevocably severed. It wasn't just my marriage that had been a lie. It was a significant portion of my adult life, my very identity built on quicksand. The man I had loved, the man who had just held me, made me coffee, and talked of a future, was a stranger, a ghost in the machine of my own life. And the worst part was, he had been so good at it, so utterly, completely convincing. I don't know how long I sat there, the silence in the room punctuated only by the drumming of the rain. The emotional death had begun. There was no anger, no tears, just a vast, chilling emptiness. It was as if a crucial part of me had been surgically removed, leaving behind a hollow echo where my heart used to be. The pain was beyond tears. It was the pain of absolute erasure. When I finally stirred, it was with a cold, precise resolve. The charade was over. Liam would be home soon. And tonight, there would be a conversation. A quiet one, perhaps, but one that would tear down the last vestiges of our shared illusion, brick by painstaking brick. The click of the lock, the familiar shuffle of feet in the hallway. Liam was home. The sound, once a comforting prelude to the evening, now felt like the approach of an executioner. I didn't move from my spot on the carpet, didn't turn to greet him. The rain continued its relentless drumming, a soundtrack to the silence that had grown vast and unbridgeable between us even before he stepped into the living room. He found me there, a still figure framed by the gray light from the window. He paused, his coat still on, a brief frown touching his brow. "Elara, what's wrong?" His voice, still laced with the practiced concern of the last few days, grated against my newly sharpened senses. It was a performance, and I was no longer an audience. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. There were no tears in my eyes, no tremor in my voice, just a terrifying, glacial calm. "I had a call today," I began, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, "from Chloe. She saw you last Tuesday." His expression flickered, almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening of his posture. He was trying to process, to find the right line in his script. "Oh, really? Where?" he asked, attempting a casual tone that fell utterly flat in the heavy air. "Near the old market," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "She said you looked very happy, and she almost called out to you, but she didn't want to interrupt your family time." The carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His eyes darted away, then back to me, a flash of something akin to panic, quickly replaced by a profound weariness. He knew. There was no escaping this. "She mentioned your sister," I said, the words falling like stones into a still pond. "Dark hair, lovely smile. She thought it was nice for you to catch up with family." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the unspoken settle between us. Then I delivered the final blow, not with anger, but with the quiet clarity of a scientist stating a fact. "Liam, you're an only child." The lie collapsed. It didn't explode in a burst of shouts or accusations. It simply imploded, leaving behind a vacuum. Liam didn't fight. He didn't deny. He didn't even attempt an excuse. He merely sagged, the exhaustion of years of pretense finally catching up to him. He slowly took off his coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and sat heavily on the sofa opposite me. He looked older, suddenly, his face etched with something beyond guilt, a profound, almost pitiful resignation. "Her name is Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper, devoid of inflection. "She's not my sister." And then the confession spilled out, not in torrents of remorse, but in a dry, almost clinical admission of fact. The affair had started over a year ago. It wasn't a passionate fling, he explained, but a slow, creeping erosion. He hadn't been in love with me for a long time, he admitted, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding mine. He'd stayed because it was easier, because he was a coward, because the thought of dismantling our life was too overwhelming. Our shared memories, our inside jokes, the quiet intimacy we'd once cherished, all of it, for him, had been a performance, a comfort he indulged in while his heart was elsewhere. The truth, when it came, wasn't a dagger to the heart. It was a slow, agonizing poison that dissolved my very being. The cruelest betrayal was not the infidelity itself, but the indifference that had fueled it, the casual erasure of our shared past. He had not just cheated on me, he had invalidated me. The Elara who had built her world around him, who had loved him with unwavering devotion, had been loving a phantom, a construct of his convenience. My identity, so intertwined with us, was a lie. Months passed. The rain, of course, continued. It was still falling today, a soft, insistent drumming against the windows of what was once our apartment. Now it was just an apartment, stripped bare, echoing with the ghosts of a life that never truly existed. The boxes were packed, neatly stacked in the corners, containing the last remnants of a shared illusion. Liam was gone. He had left quietly, almost apologetically, leaving behind a silence that was deafening. I sat on the floor, amidst the dust motes dancing in the pale light, a single unpacked box beside me. It contained old photographs, trinkets, letters, artifacts of a history that, for him, had been disposable. I didn't open it. There was no point. The memories within were tainted, their warmth replaced by a chilling realization that they were never truly mine to begin with. I walked to the window, the cold glass a familiar touch against my fingertips. My reflection stared back at me, a stranger in the muted light. My eyes, once full of a quiet hope, were now vacant, hollow. There was no anger, no sorrow, not anymore. The emotional death was complete. It wasn't a dramatic, painful end, but a slow, quiet desiccation. The person I had been, the one who laughed with Liam, dreamt with him, planned a future with him, she had ceased to exist. She had been erased, not by a sudden, violent act, but by the slow, insidious drip of quiet deception. The worst part, I finally understood, was not losing Liam. It was realizing that the Elara who had loved him, who had built her entire world on the foundation of that love, had been a figment of my own imagination. She had never truly existed in the way I believed. I was left, an echo in an empty room, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life that had been nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The rain continued to fall, washing away nothing, leaving everything perpetually gray.